The very people who were the most important in the rebellion, people who were most disaffected from the society as it was, the people who had stepped back and said, we will not do this anymore, were the very people who stepped forward to say, we have to find a new way, let's try this. And there were a number of phalanx. We had like a column that went into Massachusetts and formed the first school. We had a column that went into California, Northern California, was lobbying like crazy to do something to enable this to happen. Gene was at the head of the column that marched into Oregon and Washington.
I'm Michael Max, and this is Geological, the podcast that curates East Asian medicine and methods through the power of conversation. I was talking with a newish practitioner recently. We were discussing the usual things that acupuncturists talk about over hot drinks on a chilly morning. She said that one of the problems that we face in our trade is that the general population, let's be honest, she underscored, they just don't care about Chinese medicine. I think she's right. They don't. But then I don't think they really care about conventional medicine either. What's more, as far as I'm concerned, they shouldn't. Patients simply want a solution to their problem. Now, just because we may have had an experience with acupuncture, powerful enough to derail us from where our life was previously headed, it doesn't mean our patients should care about anything other than, will this stuff help me? And if it does, hooray, it's been a better day for everybody. The patient gets relief from a problem. We get to feel like we're productive, capable people and earn our daily bread as well. It's a good deal all around. But ask our patients to care about it in the way that we do. First, it's unproductive. And secondly, it's none of our business what other people like or believe. This brings me back to a long-running discussion that I've bumped into ever since I ran the experiment of seeing if acupuncture might be something that I wanted to do by enrolling in school. The discussion is around education, and that if we can only educate the public in the right way, then patients would flock to acupuncturists and a new day of prosperity will dawn for our trade. I don't know about you, but when someone aims some, air quotes here, education my way, I get nervous. It's not unlike when those well-meaning evangelicals knock on my door with some good news, or I'm told by some activist that the world's going to hell and I should be the next batter up to pitch in for their cause. I think I just get itchy anytime I catch a whiff of anything that's salvational. But that's just me. I'm all for acupuncture being used as widely as possible and that acupuncturists make a good livelihood. But I don't think it helps to ask people to care about anything other than, did the medicine help them? I know this might not be helpful for a marketing campaign, but I think it's a good day's work when patients forget they had a problem at all. I suspect real healing brings with it a bit of amnesia about the issue that used to dog them. But once it's gone, they don't think, oh, I'm happy. I don't have problem XYZ. That acupuncture sure is good stuff. Nope. They just get on with their lives. That, I think, is true healing. It happens quietly, and it doesn't call attention to itself. I know, I get it. We'd like to get the credit for healing our patients. We live in a world where good reviews online and people saying nice things behind your back is indeed part of how a practice gets built. But I suspect those spirit-level practitioners that we hear about in Chapter 13 of the Neijing, they are probably not asking the general public to care about the work they do. They're just doing the work. And the reward for work well done is more of it. When it comes to getting people to care about acupuncture, I think we're barking up the wrong tree. I suspect that if we genuinely help people, then they're going to tell their friends and family about this weird but helpful thing called acupuncture. Our patients don't care about our medicine, but they care about the people they love. And if you're a good enough chi plumber to have helped them, they will gossip about you to the people that they care about. These days, it's more unusual if people haven't heard about acupuncture. While it might not be the first thing people think about when they're looking for help with their health, it certainly could be lingering in the back of their mind, as they probably know someone who has indeed received benefit from acupuncture. In this history series conversation, we'll be hearing from a couple of guys who were students at UCLA. They found themselves in the midst of a cultural revolution that everyone could feel, but nobody knew where it might go. For them, acupuncture showed up in a way that was unexpected, and perhaps like a windblown seed, it was acupuncture itself that was looking for a rooting in the dominant culture of the West. Fertile soil it found, too, in the intellect, curiosity, and inquisitiveness of students like Bill Prensky and Gene Bruno. The 70s were a troublesomely fertile time. These guys were looking to make a difference. They did, too. And if you have a license to practice in the USA, it's because they and a handful of others like them had the initiative, luck, and persistence to keep moving forward. This turned out to be a longer than usual conversation and was recorded over the course of a couple of days. We're releasing both of these conversations here in this episode. As Gene said to me during the time that we were getting the conversation scheduled, Bill was the ringleader, the rainmaker. You can hear it in his voice, even as an elderly man. I suspect there is a through line for each of our lives, some North Star that perhaps is following us as we are following it. I'm grateful to be able to bring you a couple of voices that help to kindle acupuncture practice and education here in the United States. It was fun hanging out with the cool kids. Qiological Conversations come to you through the generous support of our sponsors and members. You have clinic challenges? Our sponsors have solutions. Would you like to be able to better help your patients by understanding their blood work? Jessica Parker can take you on that journey. I'm always delighted to learn something new about acupuncture. If that describes you as well, then the Needle newsletter is for you. Later in the show, you'll hear why I use Jane to make my office run smoothly. And Blue Poppy reminds us that there is no such thing as a small detail. Your focus and intention are important. Do be sure to visit the sponsors page on the Qiological website to take advantage of all the special offers our terrific sponsors have for listeners of the podcast.
Your patients are so tired of hearing that their labs are normal, especially when they are clearly suffering. You can be the one that finally shows them why. I'm Dr. Jessica Parker. Join my 10-week functional medicine cohort for acupuncturists. I'll teach you exactly which labs to order, how to interpret those results through both the Eastern and functional medicine lenses. Imagine being able to confidently explain to your patients exactly why they're exhausted when they've been told time and time again that everything is just fine. And as acupuncturists, you're already amazing at reading the body and finding the root patterns. But what if you could see the microcosm of the body in a simple blood draw? Labs are not just data, but another vital sign. In this cohort, you'll discover how to spot things like thyroid dysfunction, hormone dysregulation, and hidden inflammation that Western lab interpretation often overlooks. Join me at drjessicaparker.com to elevate your practice and finally give your patients the complete answers that they've been searching for.
I suspect that, like me, you love acupuncture. The Needle, an email newsletter brought to you by a manual of acupuncture, provides you with useful clinical insights. Ever feel overwhelmed by what's going on in our world of traditional East Asian medical research? The Needle's fortnightly update not only summarizes findings from the latest trials, but also connects them with classical acupuncture theory and insightfully translates complex data into bite-sized, practical applications. To keep you on your toes, each issue features a point identification quiz to test your acupuncture knowledge, as well as exclusive offers from carefully selected partners like jingselfcare.com. Keep your practice informed and up to date. Sign up for free by visiting a manualofacupuncture.com and click on the needle newsletter at the top of the page. Bill Prensky, Gene Bruno, welcome to Geological.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michael.
So I had Gene on a little while back for a history series conversation, and we were talking about some of the early days at UCLA, and Gene kind of ratted you out, Bill. He said you were the ringleader of what was going on there. This is
the Rainmaster.
The ringmaster, not just a ringleader, the ringmaster. So, Bill, I'm curious, what was going on back in those days?
Well, you can't talk about the history of acupuncture in America without talking about the history of America in America, which may sound a bit repetitious, but it's actually not. The period of time in which acupuncture burst out again, and this is not the first time that acupuncture has burst into the American scene, it's at least the second, and maybe more. The first time that it burst out was a period of upheaval following the Civil War, and the second time that it burst out was a period of upheaval during the Vietnam War. The country was in complete and total turmoil. You have to be in your 70s, I would say, maybe 60s, depending on how precocious a teenager you were, to understand the changes that were taking place. But the changes were immense, represented by mass media beginning to develop, and represented by the fact that the country's population split right down the middle. Half of the country being for the war and half of the country being against the war, and the half that was against the war taking to the streets and disappearing as often as not. And so in order to understand what's happening now, you have to understand that that was what was happening then. And it was the force of a bomb that blew up in the middle of the country that led to almost a complete upheaval, overturning of everything that we thought we knew about who we were, what we were doing, where we were going, and what was available to us.
The 60s were quite a time.
That's putting it very mildly.
It's putting it mildly. It's roughly 60 years ago. So look, we're living through a firehorse year right now. Last time the firehorse rode through town, Cultural Revolution in China came to be. What you're describing happened in our country. That also happened. So it's, in some ways, it's quite amazing to be sitting down having this conversation as the fire horses here again. Bill, back at that time, how old were you? What was going on in your mind, heart, spirit, as these changes were taking place? What was it that was galvanizing you? What was it that had your attention, a change you wanted to see? Look, you're a young person. All young people want to see the world be better and different. At least I think most of them do. And how in the heck did acupuncture somehow come into that incredibly volatile mix of what was going on for you?
Well, I'm 79 years old. And so in the 1960s, I was finishing my undergraduate work in college, entering graduate school at UCLA, convinced that the world could be managed, made into a better place, that the old ways would allow us to find leaders who would find pathways through this that would take us where we wanted to go. And that turned out to be really not true. And I'll tell you a story about it being not true that you say, well, that's just a story. It doesn't really say it wasn't true, but it does, because it's what was happening everywhere. So I was at UCLA. I was working on under two grants that I had been given as an undergraduate. I was a graduating student in physiological psychology, now called psychophysiology, and I was embarking upon the beginning of my graduate career. And we began to work on a study which showed that animals, specifically to start with rats and later cats, dogs, and monkeys, all became less than fully functional, if portions of their brains were removed. It was not a surprise to anybody that that's what happened. You go in surgically, you remove a portion of their brain, and they become less than functional. Not a big surprise. When the study began with rats, most of us, there were about 10 of us there, most of us could deal with it. Psychologically, culturally, we could deal with taking the brains out of rats. When we got to cats, it got harder. When we got to dogs, it got to be nigh on impossible. And when we got to monkeys, we'd had enough. And we walked out. We just walked out of the lab and said, we're not doing this anymore. Find 10 other people for these grants. We're not going to do it. We'll do other things with this money. And a colleague of ours on the way out the door coined a phrase which became our watchword, which was, we are no longer going to prove the intuitively obvious to the hopelessly dim-witted. And that was the environment in which acupuncture was born. Not acupuncture was born, but the acupuncture movement in America was born. Got pushed out the door.
You walked out the door. You didn't get pushed out. You walked out the door.
No, we walked out the door. Acupuncture got pushed out the door ahead of it.
And this was all set, Michael, in a background where just the year before that, or during that time, Robert F. Kennedy was shot and killed in 68. Okay. Institute for Dower Studies really began in 69. But our generation was a generation that never really accepted that Oswald was alone when he killed John F. Kennedy back in 1963. Okay, it was a different kind of generation that wanted to know everything that went behind the actions of our country. I mean, it was a different kind of feeling where we wanted to know all the answers and we questioned everything. So, like Bill said, this is during the time of the Vietnam War. We were the revolt was simply a boiling kettle underneath, waiting to explode, which it did in the spring of 1970 after the Kent State murders. It was like everything at that time was released, but we were a generation that was looking deeper into the meanings of things, and in a certain way, the group that Bill was the rainmaker in, we were questioning everything. We were looking for answers, not just in our own personal life, but in the world around us and the meaning that it held for us. We were searchers, we were explorers, and that was true of many of these young students that I knew at UCLA and across the country, which after Kent State led to the shutdown of campuses all across the country. And I don't know if I mentioned it to you, but Bill was also the person who coalesced what we called the strike at UCLA right after Kent State.
It was a very tumultuous time. And Gene is absolutely right. It was a time when everything was subject to change. There was no constant coming forward from the past. Everything was subject to change. But most importantly, everyone, or not everyone, but many, many people, maybe a majority of the young people, were willing to let everything go in order to find a different way. Because going forward the way we were going was leading to everyone saying goodbye to friends, brothers, relatives, cousins, neighbors, who they would never see again, who would come back to the United States in a box, in a coffin, for a war that made absolutely no sense to any of us. And in that environment, in that boiling environment, music changed, literature changed, education changed, everything changed.
So after you walked out of that research laboratory into this foment of change that was already going on all around you, what happened? What are the next steps that you took? What was the next thing? It's easy. Well, it's not easy, but there comes a moment, I think, for all of us at different points in our lives where whatever has been going on, we just go, enough, done with this. But we don't always know what's next. Sometimes there's this incredibly fertile, frightening, standing at the abyss of now what? Huge uncertainty. So you walk out of that research lab, then what happens?
We were fortunate to be in California, which was a cauldron of change in its own right. And we were fortunate enough to already be interested in the study of what we considered to be Far East Asian esoteric principles. The first of which was the study of Tai Chi, which is now commonplace. It's in every hospital that has a rehabilitation unit. It's in every hospital that has a cancer chemotherapeutic unit for the most part. People recognize its value as an adjunctive therapy. People recognize its value in supporting chemotherapy, in supporting all kinds of rehabilitation therapies. But at the time, it was relatively unknown outside of the circles in which we traveled, but becoming more and more and more known in the circles in which we traveled. And we were fortunate enough to meet someone who was able to teach us in California and who had other people in his circle. He was Chinese, and his name was Marshall Ho. And maybe Gene will talk a little bit about him in a second. Marshall was the first teacher of his kind, a traditional teacher of Chinese tradition that we encountered. He brought us on board. He made us his adopted sons. And he said, if you want to study acupuncture, which will tell you even more about this, I can take you there. And he meant it. And the reason he brought it up was because we were looking as hard as we could for something that would make a difference, a positive change that would not contain within it destruction. And even as small a destruction as the laboratory experiment with the rats was too great a destruction for us to deal with at that time. Gene, maybe you have some more you want to say about early days with Marshall.
Yeah, he taught every Saturday at Sunset Park in Los Angeles. I met him through Bill and a few others. Eventually, we met at his studio in at the Crossroads of the World in Hollywood, and there was one day where, as I recall, he saw that there was a small group of us who were really very interested in not just Tai Chi but the Chinese culture. And he said that he knew an acupuncturist who doesn't speak English, but then Marshall Ho volunteered to translate. And then maybe, Bill, you can talk a little bit about Dr. Ju Gimshek.
So Marshall invited us to meet his friend in Chinatown, Ju Gimshek. And Dr. Ju Gimshek had a Chinese acupuncture practice in Chinatown in his apartment. And he invited us to meet with him, to have lunch with him, talk with him. And we did, and we began to become very interested in what he was offering. And what he was offering was the ability to learn to do this, what we thought of as a powerful way of changing people's relationships to their bodies, to health, to healing, to getting better, to becoming well. And he offered this very positive and powerful way of approaching this to us, but he didn't trust us. We told him we were very deeply committed to doing this. He told us we were full of crap, that we were just going to take what he had learned in his life, steal it from him, and disappear. And we told him that we were not going to do that, and he didn't believe us. But he did agree to take 20 of us, 2 classes of 10, 20 of us, who were interested in learning more. And he began with the first class, which I led, and then he moved on to a second class, which, Gene, you were in that class, right?
That's right.
And Gene led that class. And
I
he
want to,
began
I
to
want to,
teach.
let me interject one thing here to understand this. The only reason that I really believe that Dr. Jew accepted us was because of Marshall Ho. So Marshall Ho's standing in the community was huge. The only way we even got to meet Dr. Jew was through Marshall Ho. And I've always believed, especially in the very beginning, the only reason he even considered it was simply because of Marshall Ho's vouching for us. Otherwise, this never happens. Don't you think that's true, Bill?
I do.
Yeah.
I do. And we began spending 2 hours a week trying to convince Dr. Jugam-Shek that we were not having him on, we were not tricking him, we weren't stealing his knowledge, we weren't going to publish it and steal it from him. And he continued to be a bit skeptical about it, to have his doubts. But he more and more he began to accept us as people who kind of floated in and out of his life every weekend. We needed to raise some money to start the class because we didn't have anything. We were graduate students. We lived from hand to mouth. We didn't have enough money for next day's rent. So we designed a series of lectures at UCLA that would be given, and contributions would be taken by the people who came to the lectures. There was a charge for the lecture. I think it was $10 a lecture, and then people could contribute more. And slowly we began to develop a following of people who would help to support us, provide some funds. We convinced Dr. Jew, Dr. Kim, as we called him, we convinced Dr. Kim that we owned UCLA. We really did. Sorry, I'm laughing because I remember it. We convinced him that we owned it. And when he came to give his lecture, which was the last of the series, we parked him very far away from the lecture hall and walked him all the way across campus, which is quite a large campus, calling every building our music building and our psychology building and so on. He knew very well we didn't own the university, but it was a little bit of relaxed fun at the end of a long period of time of getting to learn to trust each other. And he agreed to take us on. So the classes were officially enshrined at Marshall Ho's studio at Crossroads of the World. They were $20 a week for the members of the classes, and he would come with us to Marshall's studio or meet us there after the Tai Chi class in the park on Saturdays, and he would teach us. We were not allowed to take notes. He told us very clearly that if we take notes, we're stealing from him. Because if we take notes and it's in our notebook, and then somebody robs us and takes our notebook from us, he's lost what he gave us. We don't have anything. And he's given up all his time and it hasn't gone where he wanted it to go. So we weren't allowed to take notes. We had to memorize. We would race off after class and write everything down as quickly as we could so that we could remember it, but we didn't admit to having notes. And that went on for about 6 months, and then there was a cholera epidemic in Micronesia. And Fiji asked Dr. Jude to come. He was known there. They asked him to come to run a clinic and help them with the epidemic, which he agreed to do. And so he did. And he went off, and he was gone from us for quite some time. And when he returned in the fall, which he did, he took a couple of us, three of us aside, and he said, okay, you say you're serious. I want you to come to my house, and I will teach you. And we said, go to your house. When? And he said, tomorrow morning. And there was dead silence. And then we said to him, for how long? He said, until I'm finished with you. And then there was dead silence. And we went on, what time should we be there? He said, breakfast. And what time will we leave? Dinner. Now go and arrange it. And people shot off in their cars, and calls went out to parents. Guess what? The most marvelous thing, I'm dropping out of graduate school, and you need to send me $10,000. Somehow or another, we pulled it off. And in a week or 2 weeks, we began to work with him. The three of us went to the class on Saturdays at the Crossroads of the World, and then Monday mornings we would go off to his house. We would bring patients, people that we knew who were suffering from various ailments. He would treat them. He would explain to us what he was doing. Marshall would translate if he was around. But we slowly developed a kind of a pidgin English that we could speak with him in, where he could understand what we were saying, we could understand what he was saying. We began to learn. And for the next 5 years approximately, we stayed in that relationship with him. We had a talk to give in Arizona, or a talk to give in Palm Springs, or a talk to give in Portland, Oregon. He went first. We put him at the head of the crowd, at the head of the parade. He went first. We followed him. We supported him. We brought in the patients. He helped to translate what was wrong. And he would show the assembled physicians, dentists, the people who had put together these seminars, what was this strange thing called acupuncture. And acupuncture began to grow. And in every major metropolitan newspaper somewhere in the country, somewhere that year, there would be a story about acupuncture, an acupuncture clinic, an acupuncture practice, an acupuncture service performed, a tooth extracted with acupuncture, an operation done with acupuncture, a chronic illness treated with acupuncture. We began to travel, and we went everywhere. We went to Mexico City, and in Mexico City, we treated a dentist with hyperhidrosis who had never once in his life up to that time had a dry day in which he didn't have to change his clothes 20 times that day. Not 20 times, but a lot of times. And it was gone. And slowly people began to wonder, what the hell is going on here? What is this? And that brings us up to, got enough weird in your life lately?
You got enough weird in your life lately. It already sounds like it's pretty weird. And it sounds like you helped to cultivate it. Look, you put on these classes, you gave these courses, these classes, these talks as a way of generating some income so that you could study with this guy. And then you bring him in for the last one. And then it evolves into this next version. I mean, it's a step-by-step, like unending bit of weirdness. One amazing thing that you did not expect after another.
Well, we became quite well known in LA and quite well known in Northern California. Not so much in the rest of the country yet, although quite well known in the area around Washington, D.C. and the Capitol Loop, where there was another school that was also teaching acupuncture from an English, that is UK, version acupuncturist named Jack Worsley. And that school was teaching a different style, a different way of approaching things, but it still was teaching acupuncture, and it was still promoting acupuncture. So the word started to spread, and it started to spread everywhere, and every medical school had a group of students in it. We also had a group of faculty members wanted to know more about it, and we began to try and fulfill that need. And we quickly realized that we were going to have licenses. We were going to have to create a licensed profession. There was a way to practice acupuncture in the country federally because the FDA declared acupuncture needles to be experimental devices. So at UCLA, we wrote a grant and a proposal for an experimental program called the UCLA Acupuncture Clinic. And the UCLA Acupuncture Clinic was enshrined, and it became a granted, not funded, but an accepted and empowered experimental program assessing the efficacy of acupuncture needles, because that's where we had to do it to be legal. So we got legal in one spot. And then we started to move up and down the coast of California, trying to get accepted in another spot. It took a long time. We had a number of bills which were passed almost unanimously. One of them was unanimous in the state legislature, but they were all vetoed by the governor. And
Uphill
we
struggle,
continued to
wasn't
move
it?
up and down. I'm sorry?
Uphill struggle, wasn't it?
It was a definite uphill struggle.
If you've listened to this podcast for any length of time, you'll know that I'm a fan of having a small business. Running an acupuncture practice indeed requires attention to detail when it comes to managing your office. And that's why I use Jane to run my clinic. It's not just the excellent EMR or online scheduling system, both of which are a backbone to my practice. Jane also allows me to automate patient communications. They love getting text and email reminders from me, which helps to reduce no-shows. And because I choose the language for these communications, patients think I sent the message myself. They like that personal touch. I'm impressed with how flexible and scalable Jane is. From a small clinic to multiple locations and services, Jane can help you to organize the business side of the house. See how Jane can help you too by visiting jane.app/demo. Sign up for Jane and use the code Qiological to get a 1-month grace period on your new Jane account. Now, I want to talk a little more about licensure and how it moves beyond this incredibly fertile group that somehow came together with Dr. Zhu. You studied with him for 5 years. Part of that time, you are traveling to different places and putting on seminars about acupuncture. What was the kind of acupuncture he was teaching you? There's so many different styles, varieties. You know, back in the day, yeah, there was the Worsley school. That was one way of thinking. Later on, there's some, the whole TCM thing comes into being because of the books that got translated. But it sounds like you guys got introduced to an aspect of acupuncture. It didn't have the flavor of having come through Europe. There's all kinds of traditions that have, and fair enough. It didn't come through communist TCM. What were you guys learning?
Let me just say one thing here. When you're talking about Worsley, Worsley started his school in England in 1971, and as we all know, acupuncture had been in Europe, especially in France, for quite a while. Okay, his school didn't come to the United States until after we had started the New England school. In fact, some of his students from England, who were Americans, 2 of them were in our first class in Boston in 1974 and 1975. It wasn't until after that that Worsley started at school. I didn't mean to, I just wanted to clarify that timeline.
No, it's fine.
Yeah.
That's true.
That's helpful. Thank you.
There was a movement inside China. This is China now behind the Iron Curtain, behind the
bamboo curtain.
The bamboo curtain and the the start of the Cultural Revolution and the shifting values inside China, there was a form of acupuncture which was considered to be just acupuncture. It was much more, I don't know how to describe it. It's not relaxed, but it was more inclusive of more creativity within the use of acupuncture itself, almost as if you were playing a piano. So the great pianists could make any music sound good. And that's what was done in this school of acupuncture, this kind of acupuncture. Dr. Ju was amazing. I asked you if you had enough weird in your life. To have met him and traveled with him was to put much more weird in your life. He didn't do anything that anybody could really formulaically understand unless you spent enormous amounts of time with him. And he used to call it Buddha magic. That's the way he would refer to it. He would get up every morning and he would meditate about his patients. And then he would go and have his breakfast and get everything ready for the day. And then he would begin to treat. And we could follow what he was doing because he had taught us. But if he hadn't been the one to teach us, I'm not sure we could have followed it. And I remember very clearly that we were told about 3 years into this process, 4 years into this process, by a group of physicians in Beverly Hills that wanted us to practice with them. What they said to us one morning when we came in, they said to us, "You have no idea what and how much you know." We're talking about our ability to get patients well without anything that they could follow as a reason. And they said, "You have no idea what you know. You know this Buddha magic. You know how to make this happen."
Bill's referring to Orthopedic Associates in Beverly Hills, where he and Stephen worked with Dr. Baumgartner. I worked with Dr. Weiss, and this was before. This was in like 72, 73. So this is before there was any licensing in California, and they didn't care because of the results they saw with their patients. They could have cared less that we weren't licensed. One thing I want to say about Dr. Kim in terms of, because you're asking about, well, what kind of, what is the lineage here? Well, Dr. Kim's grandfather in Canton, China, was the local acupuncturist for the monks in the Shaolin monastery. He had an uncle who was in the monastery. After his grandfather died, they took Dr. Kim in and trained him. He couldn't live in the monastery because he wasn't a monk. He'd just go there during the day and come out. And the way I've always thought about it is the style that he learned was what we might call classical Chinese medicine. And the other thing I would say is when Bill was talking about Dr. Kim and understanding his ability to diagnose and treat patients, I thought he was at the. It took me many years later and only now understand in a way he was a master at intuitive medicine, which I consider to be the highest form. But as far as the style goes, I think you're familiar with the fact that after Mao Zedong shut down the classical acupuncturists, I mean, this is why a lot of the older acupuncturists who had studied under a different system left China because they were suppressed, and then only brought it back. When it was brought back, that was really designed by the medical doctors in China, not by the traditional classical acupuncturists. I think what we call TCM today is really the grandson of what those medical doctors started in China. And I notice from people that I've taught or worked with that are from different schools more recently. There's a lot about classical Chinese medicine that just is not actually taught. It may be sufficient at at a certain level, the TCM, but it is really quite different than what Bill and I were taught by Dr. Kim and Dr. So.
And I should add here that this is the point in time as we began to explore outward, writing bills that we hope to get passed in Portland, Oregon, which they were, and Oregon became one of the first states to have a specific license for acupuncturists, and I was the first person that was licensed there. That was another one of these kind of amusing stories. We went up there, the group of us from the National Acupuncture Association Institute for Taoist Studies, and Gene was our contact. He had befriended some of the people in Oregon, and he was going back and forth and back and forth, and we were all going back and forth. And we got ready to give the first exam where we were going to license Dr. So. We haven't talked about Dr. So yet, but we will. And we were going to license Dr. So, and a few of the people who traveled with us who were not acupuncturists nor physicians. There were people like us who were learning acupuncture and starting to put together the programs. And what the representative of the state licensing board, the medical board, went to Gene, who was kind of our go-to person while we were interviewing the candidates for licensure, and they said, "So who has written the exam?" And we kind of slapped our heads. Oh God, we forgot something. We forgot to write the exam. We were about to sit down and write the exam, and he said, "And who's the licensed acupuncturist who's going to be administering the exam?" And
well, that's a good question because there isn't one yet, is there?
We were the first ones there. And so quickly, we arranged for Mifu Shu, who was an acupuncturist from Washington State, which had a whole different set of rules, to license me, because he was the other examiner that the board had hired. And then I, as the only licensed Oregon acupuncturist, licensed him. And then between us, we licensed everybody else the next day.
It sounds like a total bootstrap operation.
Well, I had this. Here's an interesting thing. So a number of years later, I think it was, yeah, after I was in Oregon, I'm practicing in Portland, Oregon, in the medical dental building downtown, and then I'm working with a physician, Sam Moon, and I'm going up to White Salmon, Washington, where Sam is one of the doctors there on weekends, working in the emergency room with him and then treating patients with acupuncture. And finally he said, there's no licensing for acupuncture in the state of Washington. I go, yeah, that's not right. So he and I went to the medical board in Washington and said, we would really like to have you support licensing for acupuncture. And at the time we were talking about, okay, so there's Nevada and there's Oregon and there's California. I think there may be one other state, maybe only 4 states licensed. And so the boards actually literally said to us, we will license you if you help us to write the language for the legislation. And we said, okay, we'll do that. I mean, it was a different time. I mean, talk about weird. I looked at Sam Moon, he looked at me, and we just said, okay, yeah, sure, no problem.
Gene, what is it, do you think, about the tenor of that particular time that allowed that to happen? I mean, I cannot imagine something like that happening these days. There's entirely too much structure. What was it about the time and place that allowed something like that to unfold? What was going on in the culture?
Gene, would you let me set the stage and then you can answer that question?
Yeah, please do, Bill. Yeah, absolutely.
The very people who were the most important in the rebellion, the people who were most disaffected from the society as it was, the people who had stepped back and said, we will not do this anymore in the old way, were the very people who stepped forward to say, we have to find a new way. Let's try this and try it. I went to acupuncture. There were a number of phalanx. We had like a column that went into Massachusetts and formed the first school. We had a column that went into California, Northern California, was lobbying like crazy to do something to enable this to happen. Gene was at the head of the column that marched into Oregon and Washington to try and find a way to put all of this together.
You see, also at the time, Michael, after Reston came, this it's really weird. Okay, so you have to understand. So the Institute for Taoist Studies from 1969 that morphed into the National Acupuncture Association, which Bill was the president of in 1971. This is before China was open, and Reston came back with his reports of how acupuncture after his post-operative appendectomy helped with all the pain. Somehow that created this crazy explosion within the medical community. And of course, really the first national awareness of acupuncture. Acupuncture, what the heck is that?
Okay. I really want to put a pin in this because I think this is potent. That the Reston thing comes along and it lit a fire. But there was something else going on, and part of what was going on was this undercurrent of what you guys had been doing. There's already this movement of, I'm going to say, acupuncture into the hands of some Westerners because, you know, life just shows up that way sometimes, and you guys happen to be in the right place at the right time with the right spirit. And so you learn from Dr. Ju, you've got the work that you're doing. This is all before Reston happens.
Oh, yeah.
So there's already a kind of tinder. There's already like a vapor waiting to be ignited.
It is. And you have to understand that at the National Acupuncture Association, the NAA in Westwood, the phones weren't ringing at all. We're working with the Department of Anesthesiology at the medical school at UCLA to begin the process of having the pain clinic there. Dr. Katz, who was the head of Department of Anesthesiology there, he was very interested because, like I say, there was this like, wow, acupuncture, anesthesia, we need to look at this. You have to understand, anesthesia used in surgery back in the day, 50 years ago, is quite a bit different than today. They lost a lot of patients surgically because of the anesthesia back in the day, not because of the surgery. So, well, what an alternative. What if there's a risk-free, drug-free way to do certain things? Okay. Also, at the same time, you have to understand that when Reston, so you talk about Tinder. Reston poured gasoline on the little tinder, and our phones and the NAA never stopped ringing after that.
In California and Los Angeles especially was the perfect place for it, because if you think about who the population was that was causing the phones to ring, they were the comedians and the actors and actresses and that had come pouring into California to go to Hollywood, then came pouring out of Hollywood to be in California. And so this California environment, this California frame of mind was exploding all over the place. And part of the place where the explosions would turn into phone calls, would turn into appointments, would turn into revenue for the acupuncture clinic was UCLA. And so we began to be able to pay our own way. We began to actually begin to make a little bit of money. And that's when all the states in the West opened up. They wanted programs, they wanted meetings, they wanted medical association meetings, They wanted everything else that they could look at. And very often they wanted to debunk it and say, oh, it's a lot of nonsense. None of this is really happening. And they would walk out with an entirely changed attitude. Yeah, this is really happening. And the world is changing. And you've got to change with it. And in the middle of that incredible, you've got to change with it, we ran up against the fact that we had no legal way to do it, but we found one. What we discovered was that at that time in California, a veterinarian could delegate responsibility to treat large animals to others, so to almost anyone that they wanted to, if they felt that it would be valuable therapy for racehorses, for quarter horses, because California was full of horses. And we had a team that had people who were desperate to get out there and get to working and get the word out. And Gene, what happened next?
Well, in the beginning, we were getting calls from vets, but they were kind of pushed back. Except this one veterinarian, he kept coming back again. He refused to not. And finally, Bill one day came in and said to me and John Ottaviano, "Hey, listen, you guys are." I had already treated Bill's dog, Fen Chen, for hip dysplasia really successfully. I was treating dog. John was treating cats and some dogs, and he said, "We've got these veterinarians calling us. They want to learn acupuncture. Maybe we should have, in fact, a veterinary research group to begin doing this, and then maybe we can generate some donations from that." So we did contact Dick Glassberg.
Who did
Okay,
Glassberg first? Yeah.
Dick Glassberg, yeah, and then eventually he introduced us to other vets, and it's interesting because there was one episode that actually changed everything in terms of animal acupuncture. Now, understand, so there's no licensed acupuncturists, right? So we were left with, okay, we can work with vets only. We can't go off and teach acupuncturists. There are no other acupuncturists except really us. Our Chinese teachers wanted nothing to do with treating animals at all anyway. Okay, so he introduced us to Alice de Groot. Well, Alice de Groot was a resident veterinarian at a ranch owned by Earl Scheib. I spoke to you a little bit about this in our podcast.
Yes, Earl Scheib. That's a famous name on the West Coast.
Yeah. Well, Earl Scheib took his patients to Glassberg. So as we were working with Richard Glassberg, he mentioned it to Earl Scheib, and Earl Scheib said, "Oh, you got to come treat my horses." He had a whole stable of thoroughbred racehorses in Chino, California. So John and I go out there, not knowing at the time this was not at the request of the veterinarian. This was the owner, and he had done this before with maybe, shall I say, marginal characters with marginal types of therapies or whatever. Okay, and so
Not
Alice
not
Groot,
not anything like you weirdos with the needles.
no, nothing like that. And so we were introduced to Alice Groot, and she was ready for us, and she was ready to get rid of us. She brought out a horse that was in the last stages of emphysema, or what we call it, equestrians call it heaves. This horse could hardly walk. You could hear its breathing. It was really heavy. And the short story is we treated it, and within about 15 minutes after removing the needles, the horse's breathing started to normalize. And Alice de Groot was speechless and couldn't believe what she saw. But we had treated emphysema in humans, so we kind of transposed points to use on the horse, even though horse very different. But that event was a seminal event in terms of the growth of animal acupuncture, because Alistair Groot had us come back within 3 treatments. That horse breathing returned to normal, could walk normally. And we didn't know it at the time, but she was the most respected equine surgeon on the West Coast of the United States. And she and Glassberg then went to the veterinary board. And we didn't know this, but after about 3 or 4 months of working with her, they went to the medical board, and the medical board wrote a rule, right, in their regulations stating that Gene Bruno and John Ottaviano can treat animals under the supervision of veterinarians without being licensed as a vet. And it could be supervised or unsupervised work.
What an opening.
But the thing is, a little while later in 1973 at UCLA, at a week-long acupuncture conference, we presented that material because, okay, is there a placebo effect with acupuncture in humans? How do we know? Is this really working or not? Yeah, go tell a horse that, I'm just going to wave my hands around and put some needles in, and hey, you're going to feel better. And then the horse is going to be better. You don't even need a control for that.
And then so now you're 5 years, pushing 5 years into the 15 years startup history of acupuncture in the United States. We're starting to get a little bit of weight. We're starting to get a little bit of gravitas. We have absolutely no influence and less money. And the rest of the story involves a series of explosions. An explosion of our group into Massachusetts, and there were strong reasons why. An explosion of that group that went to Massachusetts back to California. And then an explosion of states that had picked up their momentum from those two explosions and the beginnings of licensure across the country. All of that was there. And to me, it will always be signified by Gene proving that the placebo effect was not responsible for treatment successes in animals when we were asked to go to the Los Angeles Zoo and treat a baby rhinoceros.
In clinic, there's no such thing as a small detail. The needle you reach for, the formula you prescribe, the moment you choose to listen just a little bit longer. Your patients place their trust in you, and you deserve to place the same trust in the tools that you use. At Blue Poppy, they hold their products to the same standard that you hold your care. Herbal formulas crafted for efficiency, needles that perform the way you expect them to, clinic essentials that arrive on time. Because when your tools are dependable, your focus stays where it belongs, on your patients. No guesswork, no compromises, just steady support behind the scenes. Blue Poppy, the choice of practitioners since 1982.
He wasn't that little. I wouldn't call him a baby, but yeah, we were asked to treat a rhinoceros. So a backdrop. Okay. From like mid to later 72, maybe Bill knows today, we had an affiliate of CBS News following us weekly, just following us wherever we went, to UCLA, to the conferences, with me out like treating animals. I mean, and this guy was a well-respected, and I would say at the time, not just a reporter, but actually an anchor journalist.
And he's following you around,
He's following us around.
documenting what you're doing.
Yeah, I don't remember his name, Bill, but
I don't remember his name either. He followed us for, I think, 2 weeks or 3 weeks. Every day he would show up and travel with us.
right. And after that, once or twice a month for a few months, he did go with us when we treated the rhinoceros. It was actually it was Lion Country Safari. Remember that, Bill?
Yeah.
Southern, yeah, Lion Country Safari, an affiliate of the LA Zoo, but the wildlife. So, and this rhino had been injured because a water buffalo had knocked it off a hill and it landed on his hip and injured one of its legs and it was limping. And so we went out to treat it. And, it was like, later I thought of it, well, this is kind of a publicity stunt, but for the news people. But all I cared about was helping this rhino. And so John and I treated it, and it was better almost immediately. Then the water buffalo knocked it down again. I don't know what was going on there. And we never returned to it, but it was quite an event. The only rhino, of course, this rhino was sedated, obviously.
I was wondering about that. How do you actually get up close to a rhino? Because I understand they're a little territorial.
Well, they got big horns, They would have taken us out.
The key thing about it had to do with the fact that it was sedated, because Gene and John, and Gene especially, was kind of senior on that team, couldn't quite figure out how to get close enough to the rhino to treat it without the rhino killing them, which I would have loved to have done. And so they decided to knock it out, which they did with a sedative needle and a gun. And the rhino was out pretty much in twilight sleep, lying on the ground. And Gene went in and he turned to the rhino and he looked at it and he turned his head and looked at it the same way that he looked at every dog we'd ever treated and every horse we had ever treated. And he said, "Hey, puppy, puppy, puppy," at which point everybody fell off the fence laughing, calling this huge creature puppy, puppy, puppy. But he fixed it. He cured him. And he cured him in the most miraculous way. And that really was a game changer, because it was seen on television every night. And they saw Gene going out there looking like an ordinary young, maybe medical student, sedating the rhino, patting him on his head, giving him an acupuncture treatment. And he got better. Didn't have to be put down.
That's incredible.
We go back to being a center of the show at Lion Country Safari. And that changed everything. Because that was the first time where we looked at him and we said, we can change the world.
Yeah. It sounds like there were many things here, Bill, that changed everything. This is a path of unending things that changed everything. I want to come back for just a moment to the anesthesiology department.
Okay.
Because I've got some questions about this. I remember hearing when I was first getting curious about acupuncture, like, what the hell is this stuff? Because I'd used it for my own healthcare at a certain point. And it did something that nothing else could do. And it made me feel in ways that I didn't know I was capable of feeling. So, like, what the hell is this stuff? And I remember starting to poke around with it. And one of the things that came up was, it can be used for anesthesiology. But in the time that I've actually studied acupuncture, in the time that I've practiced it, even in the time I was in China, maybe because I didn't hang around in surgical suites, I haven't really seen, and while it's very helpful for pain, we know that, I haven't seen it come into our culture used as an anesthesiological kind of adjunct. And it sounds like you guys were working with this to some degree and it sounds like there was some success with it. So the question I have is, did you guys really have success with it? And if so, why didn't that catch on? Because it seems like that would be something that could have such a huge, tremendous impact.
We had great success with it. Great success with it.
With anesthesia?
Mm-hmm.
We had great success with anesthesia, but anesthesia, for the anesthesiologist, it's much faster, easier, and simpler for them to give somebody a shot, knock them out, take out their gallbladder, wake them up, send them home, than it is to go through everything they have to do to establish a clean field and and get a patient into suitability for removal of an organ using just acupuncture. It was done. My father did dental extractions in Mexico City, where he lived, as a result of our having gone to Mexico and teaching. UCLA had a rather well-known event within our field, which was the first and the only removal of repair of an artificial hip using acupuncture as sole anesthesia. Patient was knocked out on the table. Everybody was aware of it. She was gowned and draped so that a clean field was maintained. And they went on about their business happily, and they forgot that she was awake and almost knocked her off the table trying to get the old hip replacement out. And she objected and said, "Hey, you're going to knock me off the table." And they had forgotten she was awake. But it's time consuming. It is difficult to do, and old ways were much faster. They could be taught much more simply. They required less skill, and it never really caught on. But to give us some credit, it didn't really catch on in China either. It's done, and it's still done there. But again, it's time consuming, it's long, and it's reserved for those cases where standard anesthesia would cause difficulty for the patient. That difficulty could be even death. They don't want that. So they'll use this as a way of avoiding that, but not as a general rule, the first choice for the surgical anesthesia.
And if you think about a dentist, for example, so they're going to set up a clean field, they're going to have an acupuncturist, or let's say they're the acupuncturist. Okay, then they've got to hook up a microstim to the points usually. And then, well, they can do an injection in like 20 or 30 seconds and they're done, right? See, right? Uh, I've done a bunch of dental I call it analgesia, because there's normal feeling, there's just no nerve pain transmission, as you know, there's no numbness or anything. Dentists are generally not. We had a medical dental group in Portland, Oregon, that when I finally moved up there, I took over and we were teaching them. A number of them were dentists or medical doctors too. They'd actually just call me to come in and do an analgesia if they needed it, but it was usually on someone who did not respond to uh, an injection of lidocaine or marcaine. They just didn't get numb, okay, but the acupuncture would work. So it's just like Bill said. It was a matter of convenience, and I think sometimes maybe finances that never caught on.
I suspect anesthesia has gotten a lot better over time as well.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, it has. For
and
sure.
many, many more things are done in twilight sleep, which you don't need to replace with acupuncture because it's essentially a benign procedure anyway. And so it kind of rested there.
Okay. Well, thank you for helping me understand that better. It's something that's been in the back of my mind for a long time, just because it was one of those things initially that caught my attention with acupuncture, and I was just curious about it.
The last time I used it was on myself. I had a procedure done about 4 or 5 months ago. And I said, look, we're going to just skip the anesthesia. And I put needles in Li4 on both hands. And I said, go for it. It was fine.
Okay. Well, I want to swing back to the explosion of acupuncture from Southern California, in this case, out to Massachusetts. Massachusetts, okay, the other side of the country. Why Massachusetts? How did that happen?
Well, two reasons. One, Massachusetts had a very helpful law to us. In Massachusetts at that time, a physician could assign anyone that he or she chose to be his or her nurse assistant, technical assistant in their practice. If you were a physician, you could hire anybody you wanted. And you were responsible. You were responsible for what they knew. You were responsible for directing them, but they could do anything that it was appropriate for them to do in the role that you assigned to them.
So they didn't need a license. They didn't need a degree. They didn't need...
Right. They didn't need a special license. They didn't need a different degree. They just needed you to hire them to do it. And that gave us a clear pathway to something which we've been looking for, which was a place to practice legally. This was all legal. And there was a retired physician whose name was Chick Portner, who was an old friend of my father's. Now, my father had been one of our very early supporters. He thought we were the best thing since chocolate.
Okay, hang on a second. I'm going to interrupt because I'm really... I've been meaning to ask you this since you mentioned it earlier in the conversation. When you said, hey, guess what? I'm dropping out of school, Mom and Dad. What did your folks have to say about that? I mean, it sounds like eventually your father became a supporter. Was he always a supporter?
No, they were always supporters of mine, and they were used to us doing strange things. They were very much part of the anti-war movement. They knew that we were, and I could have said, hey, guess what? We need funding for an experimental rocket to Mars that's going to take us all there and teach us how to open a mini golf course. And they would have helped. So they were very supportive and very helpful.
Wow. Okay. You had some interesting parents.
Yes, they did.
Lovely. Okay. So Massachusetts.
So we had the legality of the practice, which was very important because we couldn't ask an orthopedic surgeon with a $500,000 practice in a year to commit a crime, which for us meant enough money to live decently, which for the physicians receiving it meant nothing really. It was small. So we finally managed to get a place where we could practice legally and comfortably. And so we took off for Massachusetts to do that. And we had enough money at that point to set up a clinic, which we set up in Boston. And that's how we wound up in Massachusetts.
So you've got the clinic set up. You're able to do the work because of the way the law is written. How does the New England School of Acupuncture come out of this?
There was a very informal school. We were trying to reproduce the way in which we were taught originally, which we were not really able to do. And we should have realized we wouldn't be able to do it because we didn't have the Dr. Kim. We were wonderful. We were just the best thing since ever. But we weren't replicas of his. We weren't clones of his. We didn't have his abilities. And we were working with a very different teacher at that point, James Tinyao from Hong Kong, one of the most famous acupuncturists of the 20th century. And he wasn't Dr. Kim. He practiced in a very different way. And it didn't lend itself to the same kind of informality / formality, a kind of a mixture of the two that Dr. Kim did. And so we had all the ingredients that we needed if we would only go someplace where we could apply them to ourselves with a legal glue that worked. And so we did. We went off to Boston. We rented what we needed, the space that we needed, and we set ourselves up in such a way that we were legal. It wasn't to anybody's great benefit to attack us. We would either do some good or we wouldn't do some good, but we weren't anybody's business, really, but our own. And that experiment lasted for 3 years. And during that period of time for us, California finally licensed acupuncturists as independent practitioners. Independent, very loose phrase. And at the same time that California licensed independent acupuncturists, a number of people from the original group wanted to go home. They wanted to go back to California where they were raised, or back to the West Coast where they were raised. And so we had been in Boston. We had founded and helped to found a group of people who wanted to start a school there, but it wasn't us that were going to run the school. And so the group split. A few people stayed in Boston, founded the acupuncture college in Boston, New England School of Acupuncture, and the rest of the people left. Some left completely, changed careers, changed professions, did something different. But a number of people stayed with it, went back to California, and founded the first licensed college for acupuncture in California, and took it the next steps there. And then many of the people in that group split into a number of groups that formed splinter organizations around any place where we had been. Gene did that. He went to Oregon and helped to found all of the functioning of all of the acupuncture in Oregon, and schools in Oregon, and licensure expansion in Oregon. That became his calling. Other people did the same thing for Southern California. So it began to grow. And as it grew, it became more and more and more a commodity. And as it became a commodity that was able to be purchased by anybody because it was licensed, and insurance sometimes covered it, and then the Teamsters got into a strop about it and said that they were demanding that it be covered to their members, and the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers did the same thing. It fell more and more into that kind of controversial space in medicine. But it was legal. It could be done. Conditions in which people had to practice were difficult. They had to have a medical supervisor. They had to write a prescription. But the same thing is true of lots of things even now. And acupuncture survived it. And so we went back. We went from being caught up in this incredible expansion of this unbelievable, no one's ever heard of it, what the devil's going on here medicine, to building a profession. And I remember very clearly at the time, I was interviewed by LA Magazine, which I don't think it still exists, but it was Los Angeles Magazine. And the question was, what's the future of acupuncture? Will it be licensed in the United States? And I answered the interviewer and I said, no, we're not sure that it will be. We think we're going to prove that there's something going on that we don't understand and that the West doesn't understand, but I doubt if there'll ever be an independent practice of acupuncture. I was wrong. And that's a place I was glad to be wrong. And within 10 years, acupuncture was being practiced all across the country, not in every state, not in every city, not in every town, but close enough to where you lived that you could get to it if you needed to, and close enough to where you lived that you could help it to grow and capture another state for licensure. And that's what happened. And over the next 10 years, almost every state in the country adopted an acupuncture license law, and people began to make a living doing it. And the schools became academies, places where people sat in chairs and learned things from people talking to them. And that was wonderful, but it wasn't what we did. So it was different.
You know, there's one thing that you're asked about, like, it's kind of interesting point about how did the New England school happen? One of the students of Worsley from England who'd come back to the United States, who lived in Massachusetts, found out about our our clinic, and so he came down and started asking us questions. And after observing some of the treatments, it was really clear that he was completely unfamiliar with a number of points on the body because he asked us, he says, what is that point? And why are you using that point to treat headaches? And finally he said, well, couldn't I study with you? Well, it had, as Bill had said, Dr. So had a college the Hong Kong Acupuncture College that he had taught. He was the instructor for many years in Hong Kong. And Dr. So's whole thing was around teaching. Even at dinner at night, he used to fix dinner. He cooked dinner at night, every night for us when we were in Massachusetts. He was always teaching, always asking questions, always probing, always pushing. He was annoying sometimes about it. Right? And Stephen and Bill and I talked about, how are we gonna, Dr. So he wants to teach, he wants, a college here where, it always been one of the goals. And so this particular person said he knew some other Worsley students, and why don't we just get a class together? And he did a lot of the promotion, and all of a sudden we had, a whole list of people that wanted to do this class. And then, okay, let's do that. And then Stephen and I realized, oh, wait a second. All of Dr. So's books are in Chinese. So, so 2 nights a week, one night Rosenblatt would go, and the other night I would go, and we would work with Dr. So to translate them into English.
So he would read the books and you would basically act as a scribe.
Right, exactly. And then we go over different details and things. And that was not just his book on points, but book on treatments. Yeah, there are 2 books that we did translate this as we were going along, and then we had a secretary, Karen Freedy, who would type it all out so it'd be ready for the weekend.
Gene, it's not a bad way to learn about acupuncture, to sit with someone and have them tell you about it. And then you having to make sure you understand it well enough that you can write it down, and you've got someone in front of you to make sure that you've got it correct. That's an incredible masterclass.
Oh yeah, even though we've been working with Dr. So for several years, this was another way to it was like you say, a kind of a master class in relearning everything that we thought we might have known a bit about, but learned more in great depth.
Guys, it sounds like you have lived the life of an enzyme.
Good way to put it.
You've somehow been able to be at the crossroads of something and potentiate connections and potentiate action and be a kind of a spark that perhaps otherwise Dr. Kim's work would have never made it into your practices and the practices of the people that you've been connected with. You probably never would have met Dr. So.
I think one of the things we've tried to say is that it was how it had been done for centuries, because we were taught as if we were the actual children of our teachers. And they used to call us their Lofan sons, their non-Chinese sons. And so that's a very astute observation. We were there to facilitate a change in the anatomical development of their ability to speak. They didn't speak only Chinese anymore. They spoke Chinese and English. And something new was created out of that. I really appreciate that.
It's kind of interesting. I've never heard of Lofan translated as non-Chinese.
Well, we can be diplomatic sometimes.
Oh, yeah, that's true. It literally means white ghost. which I think is still a polite version of the real meaning.
Well, hey guys, I really appreciate you taking the time to sit down and have this discussion about these phenomenal early days and your experience with this, and to thank you for your inquisitiveness and your stick-to-itiveness and all the contributions that you made that made it possible when I came along in the early 90s and first started hearing about acupuncture. There was a path for me to set my feet on. So I want to thank you for helping to blaze that.
Well, we were really fortunate, but one of the things that Bill, I think, is really critical and important is that uh, members of our profession, it's important that they know their own history, their own roots. And it's not about Bill, it's not about me, you know, it's just about their history, about their origins, and what it took to get here. Obviously, back in the beginning, you use the phrase uphill. Yeah, it was a struggle uphill, carrying heavy weights. Okay. But that struggle still goes on today when we see some of the things that are happening and the way certain other professions try to appropriate our medicine, maybe with not the kind of training that really best serves patients, in general. And there's still a big struggle ahead. I think knowing the history of where we came from and what we had to go through could help those younger people in the future trying to move the profession forward. Always, in the end, only really keeping the patient in mind, because that is, in fact, why we did all of this.
And I think there's one other thing I'd like to add to that, and I think that's very true. What Gene just said is the ground on which we stand. But there is a pharmacologic medicine that goes along with acupuncture, and is a part of Chinese medicine, of which acupuncture is. And so you can't ignore it. But the one thing that differentiates patients in acupuncture from patients in many parts of medicine is they get listened to. And they get listened to with faculties that the acupuncturist didn't even know that he or she had before they studied. And what they hear when they're listened to, what the acupuncturist hears, helps them to get better. And it's an extraordinary experience. Is that weird enough?
Is it weird enough? Look, what you just had to say here, Bill, this is something of the human heart. This is something of the human spirit, the capacity that I suspect all of us have to be present with somebody, present with their suffering, present with their resources as well, present with being able to find a way through whatever trouble might be there. And so, yeah, look, we can do all kinds of studies and look for all kinds of mechanisms on how things work physiologically. And I'm sure that we'll find traces of it, because as far as I can tell at this point, the mind and the body are so completely intertwined and entangled. I don't think you can really get your hands on a place where you can separate them. And so to be able to use a medicine that bespeaks that wholeness and to be able to develop that sensibility of the wholeness within yourself so that you can be helpful, it's a real blessing.
I agree. And we'll need to find new visionaries for a new medicine and new practices. But we've got to start. Made a start. Put our feet on the ground and pushed off.
No.
We don't know where we'll
that's
land.
kind of the fun part, but that we don't know where it ends. No. Anything else you would like to share before we wind it down for today?
For me, I would say I'm good for today. We have part of the story left to tell. We kind of left hooks out there about the parts of the story that are left to tell. And so I hope that we will do this again and finish off the story of the early days. And we'll see where we go from there.
Yeah, I mean, it's true what Bill said. There are so many other little stories. We didn't go into certain stories with Dr. Kim and a lot of stories with Dr. So in the early days that are fascinating, interesting, and sometimes hilarious.
Well, great. Then we'll make a time to sit down and do this again.
Yeah, and I think it's important because again, it's what I said about, understanding. I mean, Dr. Kim and Dr. So really are the great grandfathers of the majority of acupuncturists who are practicing in the country right now.
There's a story about Dr. Kim and the early days of acupuncture, which may or may not be true, this story. It's told about a time when we were there, but I still don't know if it's true. We were in Las Vegas, and he was giving a seminar, and the seminar included physicians from the local medical societies, and we took a break in the afternoon, and everybody was supposed to go lie down and rest, and we get a telephone call, and Dr. Kim is in jail. He's been arrested, and we go and we get him out, and we find out that he did it on purpose. Did it on purpose because it was a way of letting people know he was there so they would come and they'd make more money. I have no idea if that story is true.
Well, it's a great marketing ploy.
But it certainly could be.
All right, guys. Well, thanks for this time today, and I will look forward to the next time that we're together.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you very much.
Some people, they're outliers. For some reason, they view obstacles as invitations. The lack of something doesn't mean don't do it. It means create it. There is a lot in this conversation that I could reflect on, but I really only got one thing to share: gratitude and appreciation. That I have a livelihood and meaningful work for north of 25 years now because these guys were the boundary-busting characters that they were, that they followed the opportunities that were offered to them, and that they kept going. It's fun to hear the stories of the early days, but what's most important to me is the reminder that difficulties are not to be avoided, and persistence is a kind of magic that works through the course of time. Over the past 20 or 25 years, all things considered, our profession has had a rather easy go of it, but that is rapidly changing. We can lament the troubles or find something in ourselves, like Bill and Gene found when they were younger men, something that takes you forward despite the uncertainty and despite the obstructions.